Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to Cannabis Business Times and Cannabis Dispensary's free educational webinar today. Our topic, of course, is the molecular tracking technology behind Applied DNA Science's exciting new platform, CertaintT. And just to be clear, that's the word certain with a capital letter T on the end, the name of the product. My name is Eric Sandy. I am the digital editor of Cannabis Business Times and Cannabis Dispensary magazine. But more importantly, I'm joined today by Gordon Hope, business development for the cannabis industry at Applied DNA Sciences, and John Schoenbeck, the project manager at Papa and Barkley. Gordon and John are here to discuss the technology behind CertaintT and how this will improve compliant seed-to-sale tracking and provide clear, helpful data to growers and retailers in a secure cloud database. Just a few notes before we get started. Please do submit questions in the questions box on your screen. I'll be blending those into the conversation with Gordon and John, and we'll be sure to leave time at the end of this webinar to get to as many other questions as possible. Before we get on with the show, I would like to say that you will all receive a link to this webinar via email in about a week or so, so please keep an eye out for that, sort of an on-demand video package. You'll be able to revisit all of this. We do hope you join us for future live webinar events down the line. With that said, Gordon and John, I'd like to welcome both of you. Perhaps, Gordon, we can begin with some of the context behind CertaintT. Maybe if you'd like to begin with the story behind this platform and why the industry might be interested in a technology like this.
Sure. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Want to spend a minute just to kind of fill you in on who Applied DNA Sciences is, because once you understand that, you'll feel more comfortable with the role we played specifically in cannabis. We're a company located in Stony Brook, New York. We're on the NASDAQ as APDN. We're the anchor tenant here here in Stony Brook, next to the university, with 30,000 square feet, 60 plus staff, a lot of intellectual property surrounding this technology, 44 issued and 83 patents pending. As far as regulations go, we are a certified lab, which is important. And when we come back and talk about cannabis, you'll see that we have experience and can provide information that's evidence in a court of law. Just to give you a high-level view of some of the accomplishments we've had over the years, particularly in supply chains. We've tagged over 200 million pounds of cotton. We were approved by the United States government and military federal contracts with 3 departments of defense agencies and a couple of unnamed agencies we can't share with you. We've tagged over 750,000 microcircuits, and we've deployed over 104,000 DNA codes globally. To make you feel a little bit, understand a little bit about the applications and where they apply. They apply in a lot of industries, everywhere from personal care, textiles, pharmaceuticals, military, of course. And the one thing around them is they're all complex supply chains, and they all have a need for assuring that everything from cradle to grave was as originally specified. It all comes back to what we call the CertaintT platform, and it's designed to provide provenance, consistency in quality, and sustainability. It breaks down into 3 main functions under the CertaintT platform. This tagging, so you got to find a way to molecularly tag the product, and then you need to test it along the supply chain, and you need to track it. So the CertaintT emblem and the experience we've had with CertaintT is done that way across all the supply chains in which it works. So let's pivot now a little bit to the cannabis space. So how does it work? At a high level, we're going to be introducing a system that actually will tag cannabis after it's been harvested, right at the harvest point. And that molecular tag will not only endure the normal drying process of the cannabis and at a dispensary for flower that would be sold, but also that same cannabis is then obviously used and processed and John will be sharing a lot more about this, as he's much more knowledge than I do in the processing side of it. But in the processing side, there's a lot of different ways in which extracts are made from that cannabis. And the good news is that the testing that we've done has indicated we can still find those tags present in the oils that were produced. And that includes tests that we ran with on cannabis oil, some Rick Simpson oil, butter shatter, and ultimately those products go into edibles. The thing that's powerful about CertaintT as a platform is that it's very unique in the following respect. No matter what seed to sale system you may be using now, if you're a processor or dispensary or grower, cultivator, no matter what it is, it has some very strong strengths to help you grow and to help you keep track of plants up until the point in which they're harvested. But after they're harvested, you're reliant only on computer records to prove provenance, and it fundamentally falls short. There's nothing wrong with those systems. They just can't possibly track the actual product that's sitting on a shelf or what is actually in the hands of an end customer. And that's kind of the preamble to this. And, you know, at this point, I think I'd like to ask John to kind of give us a little bit of insight into the experiences he had as we kind of embarked down this trail together.
Sure, yeah. So when we first started out with the project, you know, I was a cultivator in Michigan. I'm currently now working with a much larger processor in California, and we do all solventless processing. But solventless aside, one of the two major concerns we had to approach when we first started this was, is this going to affect in any way the biology or health status or shelf life of the product, the plant itself? And B, can the tag survive all of the various solvents and processing steps that we go through when we you know, manipulate it into oils, edibles, you know, heating, cooling, and, you know, like I said before, solvents. So the experience from the cultivator perspective was actually surprisingly easy. You know, I expected to see whether or not, because we used an aqueous fine mist spray solution on the plants. And of course, my first thought was, well, you know, if I'm on fully harvested flowering plants and stuff, the last thing I want to do is spray them with water. But it's not really water in the sense of like out of a spray bottle. It's a fine mist that just you can't even really tell it's on the plant unless you take a rubber glove and wipe your finger across it and get some droplets to come off. But it goes on very thin. It dries very quickly within about 10 to 15 minutes, and it's as easy as that. You just spray on, forget about it, continue on normal operations. So it was a part of my process. When my plants came out of the flowering room, went into the harvest room, they would get sprayed at that moment. Then I would defoliate, chop and hang, do the normal dry cure process, trim, the whole 9 yards, right? Put it into the jars, cure it. And once it got cured out, we then tested some of that bud material and then sent the rest of it in for processing. So on the processing side, I did what I could to find as many different processing solvent technologies as I could to see if any of them would affect the tag itself. All of the samples, by the way, from the cultivation, every plant that I tagged, I had sampled 3 and 4 times at Sci Labs in Michigan, and all of them came back pesticide-free, chemical-free, mold-free, bug-free, right? No debris, nothing was detected on them. So everything passed with flying colors, and as a matter of fact, Sci Labs was more or less unaware that there was even a tag on it. On the processing side, we went through butane hash oil. We made Rick Simpson oil, butter, butter from the sense of butter, the like actual butter. And then we made, some shatter from BHO. So, and then we had some infused vegetable oil. Of course, the infused vegetable oil, you know, the Rick Simpson oil, was the biggest one, right? So to keep things short, with Rick Simpson oil, I figured if anything was going to denature and destroy DNA, it would be a Rick Simpson oil process, right? Dissolve the whole thing in off on an open cook pot until it reduces into this black tar. There's no way that DNA is going to survive that, right? It was kind of like the thought, but we found it. They were able to recover the tag in the Rick Simpson oil. So to me, that was kind of the ultimate, the ultimate top test was something that involved both a high amount and long exposure to heat, as well as the presence of polar solvents. And if that can't destroy the DNA well enough that it can become untraceable, then I would propose that almost all other processes will be friendlier to the DNA tag. But yeah,
Okay.
so from the processing side, one thing that aside from differentiation, the fact that even though it's been processed, you can trace it all the way back to the farm. I find that a very attractive option for us as a processing business because we can source our products even if they're repackaged.
If I could jump in real quick, in terms of testing the products, the process materials, one question that just came in was sort of a testing from a consumer angle about ingestion. Could you sort of speak to how this tag fits into how the consumer experiences the product?
Sure.
Yeah,
so you go ahead,
sorry,
go ahead, Jonathan. Comment.
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to speak on this one because I am a user, right? And I have used the stuff that we tagged. So it does not affect flavor. It doesn't affect really anything. And if you really get into the granular about it, we breathe as much DNA out of the air, out of microbes and stuff that float around in the air, as we breathe that much DNA. Like it's about the same concentration as what goes on the plants, right? So on top of that, the plant material itself, the oils, anything that's got the cannabis material in it, it has cannabis DNA in it as well, right? So we ingest a lot more DNA naturally than what goes on this tagging solution.
Yeah, so just to follow up with John's comments, we get asked this a lot, and it's not just unique to cannabis. I mean, it's kind of our core business, right? So we get asked this quite a bit about how much DNA, what's in your molecular tag, is it safe, what happens if I smoke it, what happens if I eat it. We're in the best way I can make anybody feel comfortable with this is we're in the parts per billion business, okay? Our molecular tags are recoverable in parts per billion, so we don't use much of it to begin with. We have a lot less DNA material, synthetic DNA molecular tag going on to cannabis than by orders of magnitude, like 100,000 times lower. So we are safe. I wanted to circle back when John was describing the way the spray was done. He was doing it with actual water-based spray. The system that we actually will be producing, we've made it even more refined than that. We've made it based on fogging. And there's a subtle but important difference between the fogging and the spraying. The fogging particles are smaller. The system that we will use will allow the very broad acceptance of that tagant onto the surface of the cannabis. And the testing we had done from it came out equal to or better than anything that could have been done with a spray. And of course, it's much more safe. So we're happy to share with you that third-party companies outside of our own will weigh in on this, and we have we'll be putting something on our website shortly, and at the show we'll be handing out Q&A material and third-party reports for anybody interested in the detailed scientific analysis of our tags. But they are totally safe, and they will not provide any problems, whether being smoked or ingested.
Hey, if I could tag in on the ingestion too, DNA is a simple amino acid. I mean, again, we eat stuff with DNA in it, you know, meat, vegetables, etc. And they're in much higher concentrations than the synthetic stuff. But whether it's synthetic DNA or organic DNA, DNA is just an amino acid. Our bodies are very well equipped for breaking that down because we're omnivores. We consume stuff, right? So yeah, back to you, Gordon. Sorry.
No, that's good. I appreciate it. So, you know, I didn't want to assume that the audience might know, but because here we are running a webinar, but we are going to be debuting this actual tagging system that we've been sharing with you at the NCI show next week. So if any of the listeners are in the area, they could come see it live and see it demonstrated. It's a regular industrial control process. We took the experience we had from cotton, just to give you a little comfort in the maturity of what we're doing. Our systems are, you know, very expensive normally in the cotton business. They're very expensive, very sophisticated systems that sit at cotton gins and are serious industrial control systems. They're internet connected. There's a ton of information that's coming off those systems regularly and stored in our network. And that helps us refine the systems for spraying that cotton. And that same experiences are moved over now to cannabis. We'll all be internet connected on it. We'll be able to understand if there's any nuances or changes in the efficiency of those systems based on tests that will be conducted. And as part of the solution, all of this will be automated and you know, pushed out into the network environment, so it's very simple to gather that information. I'd like to spend a minute, because I'm sure there's going to be questions on this, is, you know, how do you test this in the field and what does that look like? So if there are cultivators on the phone, if you were involved with this system, you would be able to test any of the outgoing cannabis you were growing to make sure it was tagged correctly after processing. If you're a processor at arm's length from a cultivator, you would be able to do incoming inspection on that cannabis. If you're a dispensary at arm's length from a processor, you'd be able to run tests from that processor to ensure that material you were bringing into your dispensary was indeed tagged. So the testing can be done at any point along the supply chain. We're trying to make it extremely easy for anybody that needs to be doing this tagging or inspection. It's a simple test. It'll be done at a very, very high level, meaning somebody could walk in, take a sample, run a test on it, and ask themselves a question with a simple test: is this a legal mark? Is it legal in the country? And get a yes/no answer to that test. And then let's take the state of California. If we're running a test in California, you can run a test for the state of California. It's going to come up go, no go. It's yes, it's good. No, it's not from California. If there was a situation where there was a drug bust, or there was found a situation where somebody got harmed from the consumption of something, they can run a test. It wouldn't be done in the field. It would probably be a lab level test. It would require sequencing, but want to rest assured the audience that every single grower, every single processor that's part of this system would be getting their own unique molecular tag, so that ultimately protecting that brand and protecting your reputation is there, because anything that you grow or anything that you process is going to get a unique mark. So that's a good news. It can be done for brand protection, but it also is done to make sure that cannabis products and you know, solid license holders make sure that those products try to stay in the state in which they were produced. So that's kind of the high level of it.
So I wanted to
go ahead.
I was going to just jump in real quick and sort of begin to tie a lot of this together because, you know, there is sort of an existing track and trace system. A lot of this is a very helpful validating overlay to that existing system. And so just to blend in a few questions here from the audience, actually, you know, will there be, you know, you're talking about sort of a unique tracker for each cultivator. Is there sort of a way to disclose to the supply chain that this tag is part of it, short of testing?
You mean if there's a visible means to do it?
Sure, yeah.
No. Matter of fact, we intentionally, it's a great question. We have other products that have the ability to look for a visible trace, but it would usually requires the addition of some sort of fluorescing agent. In the case of flowering plants like cannabis, it was thought not to be a smart thing to add anything to it, and so we definitely keep fluorescing agents out. We keep a very small amount of molecular tag in, and that's really it.
Yeah, and if I could tag on to that point, because what I was going to say there a minute ago is exactly kind of in line with what Eric was talking about, which is this whole track and trace, especially if some of our audience here is from California. You guys understand California has a bit of a unique situation where the cities chose a tracking system before the counties chose tracking systems before the state chose theirs. And so if you're in the city of Arcata, for example, you have to report not only to your own inventory system, but you have to report to BioTrack, Metric, and SICPA. On top of that, all products you produce must be labeled with all three of those labels, right? On top of your own product label. So when you look at this at first glance, it seems like, okay, this is just another sticker or another thing that's going to be another track and trace. I feel that this here would be a good replacement for all of that. And I'm looking forward to hopefully a date when that happens, because this gives me as a professional in the industry, the ability to not only know, be able to be online with track and trace, but the two other benefits are that I can start to do brand management, right? And I can start to negate the overlaying accusation about diversion, right? Right now, we're all treated as equals in terms of diversion. We're all under suspicion, right? And so a lot of this over-regulatory habit and stuff that happens around the country is due to the scaredness of, I don't know who's the bad guy, right? Is it the dispensary owner? Is it the cultivator? Who's the one putting it in the black market? And there's really no way to know that right now, because once it reaches point of sale, the SICPA stamps, the metric stamps, all the state track and trace, it all ends right there at the storefront, right? Once somebody buys it, they can take that out of its original package, they can take it out of the labeled package, they can repackage it into a bunch of other stuff and sell it on the black market. If it gets traced back to us, then that, or if it's not traceable, then just everybody in the industry just gets that blame for that kind of stuff happening. So to me, the two big benefits with brand management and diversion are, for brand management, I can now tell because of this tag, if someone is taking stuff, if I produce a high quality product and I sell it at a fair market rate, or I even sell it at a low market rate because I'm trying to go to market or I'm trying to take care of patients, if somebody takes my stuff and scalps it, right? Like they're going to take my big jar of oil and split it into little jars of oil and resell it at a markup as their own oil. I can now trace that oil back. If I find out, or if I have a suspicion of that, I could go buy one of those small bottles of oil and have it tested for my tag. If I find that tag, now I've got court defensible proof that this guy's stealing my material, right? So that's one thing. The other one is the diversion. Personally, my opinion is that most of the professionals in this industry didn't get into it lighthearted about how the government is going to control this. We all came into this industry knowing that we were going to be under, lock and key and under a microscope for a long time. So none of us really, I think, spend a lot of time thinking about, well, how can I get stuff into the black market so I can make more money? I think most of the black market diversion happens past point of sale, which we aren't currently tracking with labels.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to share with you. So the technology that we have, I mean, first of all, we're partnered Applied DNA has partnered with TheraCan International on this, and they're a company that has a global footprint, and they have their own seed to sale system. One of the questions that was brought up earlier was about potentially working with other seed to sale systems. So the answer is yes. Our CertaintT technology can be overlaid on top of other seed to sale solutions. If a program is not yet selected seed to sale, they could be using the TheraCan BioTrace system right out of the gate, which is integrated with our CertaintT part. I just wanted to share with you a little bit. The technology at a dispensary, what we can do, and we do this for other industries, this molecular tag, we actually can tag packaging labels in a very unique and powerful way. To John's point, let's say somebody was trying to copy your package and you had a line of product and it was particularly successful, and somebody said, you know what, I'm going to sell that. I'll call that my version and I'll just copy the package. Well, in this particular case, we can actually produce a label that, unlike what we would not put on food, but we have a product where you can chemically test that label itself and then flash a light on it to prove that it is a valid label. If anybody was trying to copy that label, they would not have the wherewithal to unearth that code. And if you, again, because we're a lab, we could take that package and have it tested, and we could prove the authenticity of the actual person who signed up for that packaging. And that's independent of the product itself. So if a business started to get very successful and had some real high stakes or high market value on a brand or a line of product that was doing particularly well, you could really go and protect it with an additional layer of protection at the label itself, which can't be done, at least to my knowledge, it can't be done any other way at that level. So we're looking at the CertaintT mark, this overall CertaintT mark, as being sort of the good housekeeping seal for the cannabis industry. As people start to see this mark, they'll start to create it synonymously with quality, consistency, and safety. I mean, if we think about the medicinal side for a second, one of the biggest concerns that anybody would have is you get a medicine today and it seems to work, and you get a medicine next time either from a different dispensary or at a different time, and it doesn't seem to have the same positive effect. A lot of that may be attributable to consistency and sourcing and diversion of product and substitution of it. And so we believe that this CertaintT mark underneath the overarching TheraCan system is going to become a very, very powerful thing to get behind, because it's going to lend a lot of legitimacy at the dispensary level.
Yeah, I think there's definitely sort of a just an extra layer of information behind the track and trace system that we're all in different ways in different markets confronting. I want to move into a few questions here, guys. I'm going to try and bundle a few of them into as straightforward questions as I can. I'm hoping, though, as we move into the questions here, Gordon, bundling up a few questions here, could you sort of elaborate once more on the fogging process? I've got a few questions that relate to how this tag can be implanted into small batches, whether that's of flour or oil, and whether it can be applied outdoors.
Okay, so great questions. So right now, the introduction of what we're going to show is a industrial control system that would be self-contained and could be put in either facility, but it's not designed to tag an outdoor plant. So I'll explain that. So the system is designed to take a plant at harvest and present it to this system, right? So if you look at an outside grow operation, it's not to say we can't take steps toward doing it, but it wouldn't be this physical embodiment of this piece of equipment. There would be other ways to take our chemical formulations and apply it to a pure outside grow. for efficiency, there may be other ways to look at it, maybe with solutions in farm tractors, sprayers, etc. But right now, the initial introduction could accommodate outside grows or inside grows. It's done at point of harvest. So at any point in time, if a cultivator is processing his cannabis, if he's his own processor, he's going to take it wet and he's going to turn around and process it. If he's going to sell it at arm's length to a dispensary, he's going to harvest it, he's going to dry it, and then he's going to turn around and sell it. In either case, in line with that, the system would actually allow for the taking in of cannabis into this machine, hang it inside a chamber, and fog it. And as part of that fogging process, it'll automatically weigh the plant, it'll give it its wet weight, and it'll push it to the seed sale system. So something that you might otherwise have to do separately is now in line with the process that you'd already do. So it's all designed to take a cycle of less than 1 minute from start to finish to tag the cannabis that's present inside the fogging machine. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think what we're getting at here, or, sort of what you were speaking to, is that there are a lot of broader implications here. One thing that you had mentioned was the uniqueness of these tags to the cultivator. One question that we got was, how do you prove that that's your tag, or what sort of database do you rely on if it comes up as a question? How do you show these?
That's a great question. So think about this from this perspective, right? Why is it that the industry's under siege and can't prove provenance, right? It's because it's always a digital record that said, I entered this on this date, and here's the serial number of the tag of the cannabis, and this is where it came from, but nobody can prove it. So it's a different type of test to show provenance, right? The test is an actual chemical test. So it would be done, so to prove provenance, if somebody was challenging you as a cultivator and said, prove to me that this cannabis is yours, that's pretty easy. You take a sample, you put a rinse in it, you put it in a very simple machine. 25 minutes later, the test comes out and says, here it is. This is legal cannabis. And if they needed third-party proof of that, we can run the test. We can provide the records that show the formulations. We have to keep all the master formulations anyway. So we would be a valid lab ourselves, but we would be working with labs in state, obviously, because cannabis isn't going to be transported out of state, to do any sequencing to prove the tag was present to the specific grower.
Is there a way of, so you have a tag that's unique to each grower. Is there a tag that would be unique to a certain harvest cycle or a certain day or location? Or how far down can you drill on that information?
It's a good question. So this comes down to more practicality than one of science, right? So theoretically, and I say that in honesty, in theory, you can produce quote unquote an unlimited number of tags. But in actuality, when you're deploying this technology, you got to make the trade-offs, because if you go for more and more tags, you need more and more testing, and it becomes expensive on the testing side and very daunting and time-consuming. That's why what we've chosen to do is to keep the tagging unique at the grower or processor level, so the power is built into the tag. But when you need to extract it, you do it on a need-to-prove basis as opposed to normal testing basis done periodically. So at a high level, you're able to test and prove legality in a state or in the country with regular tests that are inexpensive to run, that don't take a lot of effort. And it can be done at the cultivator level, the processor level as well. So you could run a test, for example, if I was going to come into the state of California and I wanted to go and take a sample of oil out of a dispensary, I could take that oil and run a test. I can run 2 tests on it and find out if both are true statements. I can say, is this a legal product anywhere in the United States? I could ask that question, run a test, and I could get an answer yes to that test. More likely, I would be asking the question, to run a test. Is this legal for California? Because I'm in California. Only California products should be sold in California, and that's what I should expect to see. Run a California test, it would show yes. Now, if the California test failed, right, this is where you would ask the next question. Okay, well, I didn't see a tag for California. Is it tagged anywhere in the U.S.? Because I don't know where it came from. So you run the federal test, U.S. test, and if it comes up yes, it means you have imported legal product from another state, and you'd have to submit that sample to a lab to sequence out and find out which state it came from. If the tag was not present, it would tell you it's black market. So it can be done, but you're not going to run the tests at that level simple in the field. And we're trying to make it simple enough to use, but powerful enough to be a dig down deep and find out where it came from.
Yeah, and that's of course vital information. You know, I'm wondering whether as a buyer or a retailer, what have you, could you elaborate on how or what that test looks like and what the cost of it might be?
Well, I can't tell you the cost because it's probably going to be built into a program, so it's hard to talk cost. But I will say this: the test is something that can be done by people with a very short amount of training, 10, 15 minutes of showing somebody how to run this test. It'll involve, I'll give a real world example. Let's say I'm going to test cannabis and I'm at a dispensary and I want to test that piece of cannabis I'm ready to buy. I would take a tube out, I would take a piece of this cannabis, put it in a rinse tube, shake it up. I would take some samples out of it and just drop it into 3 little wells in this piece of test equipment and push go. And 20 minutes later, you'd get a go, no-go result on whether or not it passed that test. It's a chemical test. It's very straightforward. There wouldn't be room for a lot of misinterpretation. Either the tag's there or it isn't. And that's about what it would take. Those same tests could be run at a dispensary. They could be run at a processor. They could be run at the cultivator itself. So this is the way it's done in complex supply chains using our technology. It's done in the cotton industry. Cotton industry is maybe even more complicated than cannabis. It goes from the cotton gin in Texas, it goes to third world countries, 3 different third world countries between thread, yarn, material, fabric. By the time a bed sheet's woven, it's traveled three different continents before it comes back to the United States as a bed sheet. And in each case, they're running the test to take incoming goods from the previous vendor to make sure the tag is good. So we're using that same methodology here. And the School of Hard Knocks has taught us, go for practical, don't go for theoretical perfection. So we're trying to keep it simple, keep it inexpensive, allow the testing to be done at a variety of levels. And for the more complex testing, we'll keep it in state and work with the labs in state.
From a production
Okay.
level, on that, the unit, to describe the unit, or as far as like how bulky is it, how expensive and stuff, it's really not that expensive. There's a big box. I couldn't really tell you the exact cost. I'm sure a lot of that depends on how much you test, etc. But the little unit that you use to do the field tests, we had the pleasure of using that in Michigan to do our preliminary tests. It's just a small, it almost looks like an Alexa, right? It's a little metal box with a cap that you put the samples in, with 3 or 4 little slots in the top for you to put your little sample, your test analyte jars in, and it plugs into a computer, plugs into the wall, and runs on software. So it's just like having an Alexa attached to your PC.
Yeah, and John, just so you know, we've even simplified that from when you saw it. So what we have now is something that can be, it's even smaller than that. It will end up being less expensive regardless of how we do it. And it actually uses an iPhone as part of the device. You take an iPhone app, you clip it in, you get an app, you get credentials, and it's a small unit, could sit on a shelf, and it's very powerful and very simple to operate, and it'll have use the app interface to produce the test results right on the face of the iPhone.
I want to sort of take a segue there. Speaking of simplicity of use, throughout this presentation, we've sort of been talking about sort of quality control related ideas. Moving away from the tests and back to the actual application of the tags, what's the quality control process like? What should cultivators or grow employees know about this process? And is there any protective equipment that might be needed?
Okay, so great questions. We've designed the system so that it doesn't require knowledge, specific cannabis knowledge to operate the system, right? So number one, going in, you had to assume that cultivators are going to be in a crunch at harvest time. I mean, this is you grow and you harvest 2-3 times a year. And when you do that, depending upon the scale of your operation, it could require going out and getting excess labor and bringing it in part-time to do that harvest. So one of the key requirements we put down for ourselves when we designed the system is it can't require a lot of education and training to get it done. So it's our belief, and people will know when they see it, it's a very straightforward system to use. It will take as an example, it will take a barcode. Let's just walk through an example, make everybody comfortable with it. So there's some sort of tag sitting on a plant. I'm assuming we have a compliant plant. There's going to be some tag on it. We actually have a barcode system, and in the case of the TheraCan system, TheraCan's barcode would be on that plant. And in our system, we have a barcode reader. You just simply take the barcode reader, you scan the tag, you open up a door, you put the cannabis in it, it's automatically weighed. You go back outside, you hit a color touch screen that says start. It turns around, it checks the fingerprint of the person to make sure the person's authenticated to use it. It takes an additional picture of that person for digital records to match up the person for security reasons. The system starts with the push of a button, and a minute later, it finishes, and you take it out. And that's all there is to it. Take it and put it on the next process you would have normally done in your normal drying operation or sending out for processing.
Okay. As we're sort of rounding the bend here, just keeping one eye on the clock at least, we do have a few questions that relate to price and sort of the pricing model for this type of product, this type of service. Would that be sort of a subscription model, or how is that rolling out?
So it's a great question. The way we're envisioning this so far is we've been, as you might imagine, we're talking to many states, and we're also looking internationally at other countries. And I can share with you openly the discussion at the states is to try to get something that's cost effective, that's simple to implement from their perspective. We're going to try to bundle this and make it very, very simple. So it's going to encompass everything. It's going to encompass the equipment the testing equipment that would go on site. It's going to include the assays that would be run at a cultivator or dispensary. It's going to include any licensing for any of the CertaintT marks that we use. It even is going to include other use of our technologies, which can provide security system overlays on top of the security you have. So I know we couldn't cover everything in one webinar, but the vision is to really make it a very powerful but simple to implement program. That's why we designed the system to be no real education required, simple to use. There's no special training. By the way, to answer the question directly, you guys asked about safety or precautions, OSHA precautions. There's nothing in the system that requires any type of OSHA precautions. The only thing you'll need is you're going to need a source of clean water. We recommend RO water if you're going to feed it into the system. We have a closed loop system, and when you see it, you'll see it and have your own opinion of it. But it's a closed loop system. All of the fog and everything stays self-contained inside the system. So we've put as much attention to that level of detail as I think is humanly possible at this point. And we've automated the heck out of it to make it value added to an operation, not a burden. It should be straightforward for your operation. It's not to say everything's perfect. Every change comes with something. But we did put a lot of thought into trying to keep it streamlined.
Okay, sort of as a roundabout here. Oh, yeah.
All right. To add on to the cost model too, I know Gordon mentioned that he's talking to a few state regulators, and that Applied DNA Science is trying to come up with a plan based on what the regulators and stuff need. One thing that I just wanted to kind of add to that, Applied DNA Sciences is very good about talking to us on the industry level as well about what we think is fair. So we do get some input with Applied DNA. I've given them my own input on cost structure and how it should be modeled and stuff. And of course, the regulators have a much bigger opinion on that than we do. But Applied DNA does take our opinion into consideration when they're looking at modeling out the cost structure. So your input is always appreciated.
Yep, we're an open book for input, guys. We know that this is something that nobody would take lightly, whether it's a cultivator, a processor, or a state program looking to implement it. So we're trying to use our past experience in complex supply chains and bring that experience over to bear in cannabis. And we're happy to listen and learn. John's been excellent at providing us feedback. We take it seriously. A lot of the input on thoughts about how we would do this and get the system to be simple. A lot of input came from John and other cultivators we'd spoken to.
Guys, is there a sort of like a starting base rate or any sort of rate you could refer participants to? And as a lasting question, where should people go next? How can they reach you and follow up after this?
Yeah, so anybody can reach me at Gordon.Hope, H-O-P-E, Gordon.Hope, H-O-P-E, at adnas.com, adnas.com. And if we're going to be out in San Jose at the show in San Jose, California, next Wednesday through Friday at the NCIA show, and we'll actually have our first debut. Anybody going is going to see for the first time in public the system that I'm describing. It's going to be on the show floor. It's going to be actually operating, so you can see it and ask the questions. We're looking forward to it. If you want a general answer on pricing, we're looking, and when I talk to state levels, I talk about, and at program levels, at about 7 cents a gram. So if you want to look at something an all-in type of pricing structure, that's kind of where we're targeting it. And there's, obviously there's different size cultivators. The equipment itself is an industrial piece of equipment. We will have programs to help turn that from capital investment into operational cost above the 7 cents, but we're happy to work those programs. We're trying to make this painless, we're trying to make it affordable, and we're trying to provide real value for it.
All right, we've got one last super quick question on the way out. You mentioned iPhones earlier. Would this work on other operating systems, other devices?
No, as a matter of fact, it comes with it. Does it come with it? So the device we have is actually going to come with the iPhone. So it's right now it's not an Android-based product. That was kind of the first questions I'd looked and asked. There may be plans to do that in the future, but right now it's an iPhone-based product, and they package it together with their device. It's a very attractive offering, very simple to use. It's gonna help bring this into the 21st century. Instead of making it science heavy, it's gonna make it app friendly.
Well, that sounds terrific. I want to say, as we've just passed the 45-minute mark, Gordon and John, thank you so much for the time today, and thank you to everyone who has attended this. I'll repeat, as I was saying earlier, this will be sending out an email, I guess, in about a week with this webinar, sort of as an on-demand video package. Please do revisit this. Please do get in touch with these guys and follow up as you please. And once again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. Good job, Eric.